The 4th of June, 1942. 10:22 a.m. 14,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. Lieutenant Commander Richard Halsey Best pushes his control stick forward, and his Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber tips into a near-vertical plunge. Below him, the red rising sun emblazoned on the flight deck of the Japanese carrier Akagi grows larger with each passing second. Anti-aircraft fire erupts from the ship like a deadly fireworks display, black puffs of flak bursting all around his aircraft, shrapnel pinging off the fuselage. You can almost hear the metal screaming as the dive bomber accelerates past 250 miles per hour, the engine howling in protest. In the rear cockpit, radioman gunner James Francis Murray grips his twin, 30 caliber machine guns, watching for the zeros he knows will come. The altimeter spins backward 10,000 feet, 8,000, 6,000. Best holds his dive, steeper than most pilots dare, longer than doctrine dictates. The carrier's deck fills his bomb sight now, that great red circle painted near the elevator looking like a bullseye placed there just for him. At 2,500 feet, Best pulls the release. The 1,000-pound bomb drops away, and he hauls back on the stick with both hands, fighting against the crushing G-forces that threaten to black out his vision. The Dauntless groans under the stress of the pullout, its wings flexing visibly as it levels off just above the wave tops. Behind him, Murray watches their bomb punch through Akagi's flight deck, a heartbeat pass. Then the explosion, a pillar of fire and smoke erupting from the carrier's hangar deck, where 18 fully fueled and armed torpedo bombers had been waiting to launch. This is the moment that will change everything. One man, one bomb, one perfect dive, and the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy begins its death spiral into the Pacific. But Best isn't finished. Before this day ends, he'll be the only American pilot to successfully attack 2 Japanese carriers in a single day, and it will cost him everything. The path to this moment began long before the morning of June 4th. It began in the quiet halls of the United States Naval Academy, in the cockpits of biplanes over Pensacola, in the ready rooms of carriers steaming through peaceful seas. Richard Halsey, Best they called him, Dick, had been preparing for this moment his entire adult life, though he could never have imagined it would unfold quite like this. The son of Frank Ellsworth Best and Uretta Love Halsey, Richard entered the world on the 24th of March 1910 in Bayonne, New Jersey. His lineage traced back to his grandfather Edward, who had fought with the 13th Wisconsin Infantry during the Civil War before moving west to California and Oregon. Young Dick grew up hearing stories of service and sacrifice, of duty to country that ran through his family's blood like an inheritance more valuable than gold. In 1928, an 18-year-old Best walked through the gates of the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis. You can picture him there, ramrod straight, jaw set with determination, eyes focused on a future he could only imagine. The academy shaped him, molded him into an officer who graduated with honors in 1932. His first posting, the light cruiser USS Richmond, where he learned the rhythms of naval life, the discipline of shipboard routine, the weight of command responsibility. But the sea alone wasn't enough for Best. The sky called to him with a siren song he couldn't ignore. In 1934, he transferred to Naval Air Station Pensacola, Florida, the cradle of naval aviation. Here, in the humid Florida air, cadets learned to defy gravity in fabric-covered biplanes that seemed held together by little more than wire and determination. December 1935. Best earned his wings of gold, joining the Brotherhood of Naval Aviators. His first squadron assignment placed him in Fighting Squadron 2, VF-2B, aboard the USS Lexington, flying the Grumman face-to-face. Picture these early carrier operations pilots landing on wooden flight decks in open cockpit biplanes, guided by nothing more than signal flags and nerve. The margin for error was measured in inches and seconds. One moment of hesitation, 1 degree off your approach angle, and you'd end up in the Pacific or wrapped around the carrier's island structure. By 1938, Best faced a choice. Join a patrol squadron in Panama or Hawaii, or become a flight instructor at Pensacola. He chose to teach, joining Training Squadron 5, where he passed on his knowledge to the next generation of naval aviators. He taught them aerobatics, dive bombing, formation flying, all the skills that would soon be desperately needed in a war nobody yet saw coming. The world changed on the 1st of September 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. Though America remained neutral, every military officer knew the storm would eventually reach their shores. Best decided he could be of more use in the fleet and requested transfer to the Pacific as a dive bomber pilot. On the 31st of May 1940, he received orders to report to Bombing Squadron 6, VB6, aboard the USS Enterprise. Walking up Enterprise's gangway on the 10th of June 1940, Best entered a world of controlled chaos. The Big E was one of America's newest carriers, commissioned just 2 years earlier. Her flight deck stretched 809 feet to a pilot approaching for landing. It looked impossibly small. Best became the squadron's operations officer, the third in command, organizing training schedules and mission planning. The 7th of December 1941, 150 miles south of Pearl Harbor, the Enterprise steamed through calm seas, returning from delivering marine fighters to Wake Island. At 6:15 a.m., 18 SBD Dauntless scout bombers launched from her deck, including 5 from Best's VB6. Their mission: routine reconnaissance ahead of the carrier. They had no idea they were flying into history. As these scouts approached Oahu, they encountered something impossible: Japanese aircraft attacking Pearl Harbor. You can imagine their confusion, then horror, as they realized what was happening. Anti-aircraft fire from both Japanese and American forces filled the sky. One VB6 aircraft was shot down over Pearl Harbor, its crew becoming some of the first casualties of America's entry into World War II. Best, still aboard Enterprise, listened to the fragmented radio reports coming in. Pearl Harbor under attack. This is no drill. The world had changed in an instant. America was at war, and Best's theoretical training would now be tested in the crucible of combat. Through early 1942, Best advanced to executive officer of VB6, then squadron commander. He led his men on strikes against Japanese positions in the Marshall Islands, helped cover the Doolittle raid on Tokyo. Each mission taught hard lessons written in fuel consumption calculations and bomb damage assessments, but nothing could prepare them for what was coming. By May 1942, American codebreakers had cracked the Japanese naval cipher. They learned of a massive operation aimed at Midway Atoll, a tiny pair of islands that controlled the Central Pacific. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto planned to lure the American carriers into a trap and destroy them, clearing the way for Japanese expansion. What he didn't know was that Admiral Chester Nimitz had prepared a trap of his own. The Enterprise and her sister ship Hornet sortied from Pearl Harbor on May 28. The hastily repaired Yorktown, still bearing scars from the Battle of the Coral Sea, limped out 2 days later. 3 carriers against 4 Japanese fleet carriers, the odds weren't good. But sometimes in war, odds matter less than timing, leadership, and a measure of luck. Best spent these final days before battle drilling his pilots relentlessly. Dive bombing wasn't just about courage, it required precise calculation. You had to account for wind speed, target movement, your own aircraft speed and angle. Release too early, and your bomb would miss. Too late, and you wouldn't pull out of your dive. The margin between success and death was measured in fractions of seconds. The 4th of June 1942, 7:06 a.m., flight deck of USS Enterprise. The morning air vibrates with the roar of aircraft engines warming up. Best stands near his Dauntless, serial number 6B1, watching his squadron prepare for launch. The intelligence is still fragmentary. Japanese carriers spotted approximately 200 miles northwest, but their exact position remains uncertain. You can feel the tension on the flight deck, that peculiar mixture of fear and anticipation that precedes combat. One by one, the aircraft launch. 14 TBD Devastator torpedo bombers lumber into the air first, their obsolete frames already seeming to belong to another era. Then the dive bombers 33 SBDs from VB6 and Scouting Squadron 6, led by Air Group Commander Wade McCluskey. Finally, 10 F-4F Wildcat fighters, too few to properly protect them all. But almost immediately things go wrong. The squadrons become separated in the vast Pacific sky. The torpedo bombers, flying low and slow, lose contact with the dive bombers climbing to altitude. The fighters, trying to protect everyone, end up protecting no one effectively. Best leads his squadron northwest, following McCluskey toward the last reported position of the Japanese fleet. For 2 hours they fly, fuel gauges dropping steadily toward empty. Below them stretches nothing but endless ocean, no sign of the enemy. Some pilots begin to wonder if they'll have enough fuel to make it back. Then McCluskey makes a decision that will prove decisive. Spotting a Japanese destroyer racing northeast, he decides to follow it, reasoning it must be heading toward the main fleet. At 9:55 a.m., they find them. 4 Japanese carriers in a box formation, their decks busy with aircraft preparing to launch. But something else is happening below. American torpedo bombers are making their attack runs, drawing every Zero fighter down to sea level, pulling away the protective umbrella that should have been guarding against dive bombers. The torpedo bomber attacks are suicidal. Slow, vulnerable, flying straight and level during their attack runs, they're picked off one by the swarming Zeros. Of the 41 torpedo bombers that attack that morning, only 6 will return. Not a single torpedo hits its target. But their sacrifice, though they don't know it, has created the opportunity Best and his fellow dive bomber pilots need. At 10:20, as the last torpedo bombers are shot down, Best watches McCluskey begin his dive on the nearest carrier, the Akagi. This violates standard doctrine, which calls for the leading squadron to attack the far carrier while the trailing squadron takes the near one. But McCluskey, a former fighter pilot, new to dive bombing tactics, doesn't realize his error. Best sees all 31 remaining Dauntlesses following McCluskey toward Akagi. In that instant, he makes a decision that will change the course of the war. Banking hard left, he signals his squadron to break off. But in the chaos of the moment, only his 2 wingmen, Ensign Frederick Weber and Lieutenant Junior Grade Edwin Kroger, see his signal and follow. 3 planes against a carrier. The odds are almost absurd. Below them, Akagi turns into the wind, preparing to launch her strike aircraft. Her deck is crowded with Kate torpedo bombers, their engines running, bombs and torpedoes attached. Admiral Nagumo stands on the bridge, perhaps allowing himself a moment of satisfaction. The American torpedo attacks have failed. In minutes, his counterstrike will launch, and the American carriers will burn. Best rolls inverted and pulls into his dive at 10:22. The world turns upside down, then rights itself as he points the nose straight down. You can imagine the physical sensation, your weight disappearing as gravity releases its hold, then the steadily building pressure as the dive continues, pushing you hard into your seat. The altimeter unwinds like a clock running backward. 14,000, 12,000, 10,000 feet. Through his telescopic sight, Best keeps the target centered. Anti-aircraft fire erupts from Akagi and her escorting vessels. Black puffs of smoke appear around his aircraft, each one potentially lethal, filled with steel fragments designed to shred aluminum and flesh. A Zero fighter curves in from the right, but there's no room to maneuver in a dive this steep. Best holds his course. 8,000 feet. 6,000. 4,000. In accounts written years later, Best would say he felt no fear in these moments, only a crystal clarity of purpose. Every hour of training, every practice dive, had prepared him for these 20 seconds. The red circle on Akagi's deck grows larger, filling his bomb sight completely. At 2,500 feet, Best releases his bomb and immediately pulls back on the stick. The G-forces slam into him 4, 5, 6 times the force of gravity. Blood drains from his brain, his vision tunneling to a narrow point of light. The aircraft groans under the strain, wings bending visibly. But the Dauntless holds together, leveling off just above the wave tops at 10:26. Behind him, Murray shouts over the intercom, "It's a hit!" Best's 1,000-pound bomb punches through Akagi's flight deck amidships, near the island structure. It detonates in the upper hangar among those 18 fueled and armed Kate torpedo bombers. The explosion triggers a chain, reaction fuel ignites, torpedoes cook off, bombs detonate. Within seconds, Akagi is an inferno. Kroger's bomb lands just off the port bow, a near miss, but close enough to add to the damage. Weber's bomb explodes near the stern, jamming Akagi's rudder. Of the 3 bombs dropped, 1 direct hit is enough. Akagi is doomed. Banking away from the burning carrier, Best looks around to get his bearings. Smoke pillars rise from 2 other points on the horizon. Kaga and Soryu are also burning, hit by other American dive bombers in the same crucial minutes. 3 of the 4 Japanese carriers that attacked Pearl Harbor are now floating funeral pyres. But there's still one left, Hiryu, separated from the others and untouched. Best leads his 2 wingmen back toward Enterprise, nursing their fuel supplies. The mathematics of carrier warfare are brutal. Every gallon of fuel burned in combat is one less for the return journey. Run out over the ocean, and you're just another casualty of war, swallowed by the endless Pacific. Landing on Enterprise's pitching deck, Best has no time to celebrate. Hiryu has already launched strikes that will eventually cripple Yorktown. Another attack must be mounted immediately. At 5 p.m., Best leads what's left of VB-6, just 4 aircraft, back into the air, joined by orphaned dive bombers from the damaged Yorktown. The afternoon attack is different. The Japanese are ready now, their remaining 0 fighters positioned at altitude, anti-aircraft guns fully manned and alert. As the American dive bombers approach, the Zeros pounce. You can picture the melee Dauntlesses trying to maintain formation while Zeros slash through them, machine guns chattering, pilots throwing their aircraft into desperate evasive maneuvers. Best pushes through the fighter screen and rolls into his second dive of the day. This time the anti-aircraft fire is more accurate, more intense. Flak bursts bracket his aircraft, close enough that he can hear the shrapnel rattling off his wings. A Zero follows him down, its pilot either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, firing even as both aircraft plunge toward the ocean. At the release point, Best pickles his bomb and pulls out, the G-forces again crushing him into his seat. This time, 4 bombs strike. Hiryu historians still debate which pilots scored the hits, but most agree Best was likely one of them. It doesn't matter for the historical record. What matters is that Hiryu too begins to burn. As Best climbs away from the target, he takes a breath and tastes something metallic, wrong. He coughs and feels wetness in his oxygen mask. When he pulls it away, his glove comes back red with blood. During the long morning search, the oxygen system in his aircraft had overheated. The sodium hydroxide used to scrub carbon dioxide from the breathing system had turned caustic, releasing fumes directly into Best's lungs. With every breath during combat, he'd been poisoning himself. The caustic soda had activated dormant tuberculosis bacteria in his lungs, beginning a chain reaction that would end his flying career in this moment of his greatest triumph. Landing back on Enterprise as the sun sets on the 4th of June 1942, Best climbs out of his cockpit and immediately begins coughing up blood. Within hours, he's running a fever of 103 degrees. The flight surgeon grounds him immediately. Best will never fly again. You can imagine his frustration, lying in a hospital bed at Pearl Harbor, while his squadron mates continue the war without him. In a single day, he'd accomplished what no other American pilot had delivered fatal blows to 2 Japanese fleet carriers. He'd helped turn the tide of the Pacific War. And now, at the moment when his experience was most valuable, his body had betrayed him. The statistics of Midway are staggering. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, 1 cruiser, 248 aircraft, and over 3,000 men. America lost 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, 150 aircraft, and 307 men. But beyond the numbers was the strategic reality. Japan's offensive capability in the Pacific was broken. The war would continue for 3 more years, but after Midway, Japan would never again mount a major offensive operation. For Best, the next 32 months were spent in hospitals, fighting tuberculosis. The Navy retired him on medical disability in March 1944, his war over while others continued to fight. He returned to civilian life, working first for the Douglas Aircraft Corporation, then for the Rand Corporation until 1975. He rarely spoke publicly about his wartime service, maintaining the quiet dignity that marked his generation. But those who knew what to look for could see his significance. Admiral Thomas Maurer and Vice Admiral William Hauser attempted to have Best awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously, arguing that his actions at Midway deserved the nation's highest recognition. The attempt failed. Bureaucracy and time had created too many obstacles, but among naval aviators, Best's name carried special weight. Nobody pushed his dive steeper or held it longer than Dick, his fellow pilots would say. It was more than just technique, it was about commitment, about following through regardless of the cost. In those crucial 20 seconds over Akagi, Best embodied everything the Navy had trained him to be. On the 28th of October 2001, Richard Halsey Best died in Santa Monica, California, aged 91. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. As the Navy Honor Guard folded the flag over his grave, aircraft from the nearby Pentagon flew overhead a final salute to the man who, on one pivotal day, changed the course of history. History turns on such small hinges. If Best hadn't noticed McCluskey's error, if he hadn't broken off to attack Akagi with just 2 wingmen, if his single bomb hadn't found its mark, any of these factors could have changed everything. Akagi might have launched her strike. Those 18 torpedo bombers might have found and crippled Enterprise or Hornet. The Battle of Midway might have ended very differently. But Best made the right decision at the right moment. He held his dive those extra crucial seconds. His bomb flew true. And in that impact, in that explosion that gutted Akagi's hangar deck, the momentum of the Pacific War shifted irrevocably. Today, when you stand on the memorial at Pearl Harbor or read the names at the National Museum of the Pacific War, remember that victory wasn't inevitable. It was earned by individuals who, in moments of extreme peril, did their duty with precision and courage. Richard Halsey Best was one of those individuals, perhaps the most important one on that crucial June morning. His story reminds us that history isn't made by anonymous forces or inevitable trends. It's made by people trained, determined, willing to push their dive just a little steeper, hold it just a little longer, even when the cost might be everything. In 20 seconds over the Pacific, one man proved that a single individual, at the right place and the right time, can indeed change the world. The last time Best spoke publicly about Midway, near the end of his life, he said simply, "It was revenge, sweet revenge for Pearl Harbor." But it was more than that. It was the moment when America proved it could not only endure but prevail. And at the center of that moment, pushing his Dauntless into its fatal dive, was a Navy pilot from New Jersey named Dick Best, doing what he'd been trained to do, better than anyone else had ever done it.